Well, good morning, friends and family. Thank you once again for joining us on our Sunday morning video service. Today we're celebrating National Back to Church Sunday at the church. So we're going to have a rib cook-off afterwards, and you can probably get there if you started this at 10 before the rib cook-off's over, if you want to join us. No, we'd love to have you join us, though. It's time to get back into fellowship and get back at the church. And speaking of getting back at the church, the men's group is meeting Monday nights at 6:30 here at the Father's house. If you want to be a part of that, I know they'd love to have you join them. They also do it on Zoom, are going to continue to do it on Zoom in case somebody can't be there. So let Pastor Carl or Pastor Carlos or CR know if you want to be involved in that. Our ladies group is still meeting at 6:30 on Thursday nights on Zoom. If you want to be a part of that, Deanne and I would love to have you join us and the other ladies. Irma, I'm still really waiting for you to get on. We'd love to have you join us. Anyway, today is our regular tithes and offerings. You know the drill. You can go to thefathershouse.org, click on the giving button, set it up as a one-time gift or a recurring gift. You can give to our mission in Argentina or India that way. Or you can donate to the stage remodel that we've been talking about to buy cameras so that we can start a live streaming service so that you at home can enjoy our fabulous worship that our team has put together each week. You can mail a check to the Father's House at 133 Bernal Road, San Jose, California, 95119. Or if you live in the local area and you'd like us to come by and pick up a check, we'd be happy to do that too. And thank you once again for all of your generosity. It has really helped keep the bills paid at the Father's House. God's just been very faithful to us. So I mentioned it's National Back to Church Sunday, and our theme this year is just love. Yvette and I were talking one day and it just clicked. So God tells us just love, and that's all it takes. So at our ladies meeting last Thursday night, we were talking about that, and we were talking about who was going to be able to come and who wasn't going to be able to come. And before we got off, Deanne Paradis asked if she could share something, and I thought it was absolutely perfect for what we're talking about in just love. It says, love starts with God. He initiates it. His love fills us when the Holy Spirit comes to live in us when we trust in Him. This love then overflows from us to others. Filled with His love, we become motivated and energized to share it with others. It's easy to say we love God when that love doesn't cost us anything more than weekly attendance at church services. But the real test of our love for God becomes evident in how we treat the people right in front of us, our family members, our fellow believers. We cannot truly love God while neglecting to love those who are created in His image. Jesus' love reveals itself in our compassion or generosity and our ability to help others. When we become Christians, we become part of God's family, with fellow believers as our brothers and sisters. God determines who other family members are, not us. We are simply called to accept and love them. You know, when we started this service outside, when they finally restricted so we could meet outside, we all agreed that this was going to be our sign for the Father's House. This means I love you. And I just want each and every one of you to know that is watching this, Pastor Carl and I do love you. You have become part of our family, and we appreciate and love each and every one of you. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Carl. Thank you.
There you guys are. Good morning, Father's House. Glad to have you with us on this National Back to Church Sunday. That should be a good one. We're going to have a great time at church. I hope that maybe you can make it. Maybe you'll watch this, I don't know, Saturday night, early Sunday morning. You'll say, all I know is we're going to the Father's House. One of the good reasons to be here is because, as Penny mentioned, we're going to be having a rib cook-off. We're going to have rib here. We're going to have tri-tip. It's rib cook-off, but everybody has to throw in their lot. So we're going to have ribs. We're going to have tri-tip. Somebody's going to do tri-tip. Somebody's going to do chicken. I'm going to do baby back ribs, regular ribs, and then I'm going to do rib tips. I'm going to smoke those tonight for this barbecue because I might just win this cook-off. Smoke them on my green eggs. So if I win, I win. If I don't, that's okay too. It's all just a matter of fun. So if you like ribs or if you like chicken or whatever else, come on and join us today. I think you'll have a good time. I'm excited about it. Our worship team has been working hard on the music for this, so it's going to be a special day, needless to say. And we hope that you can join us today. With that said, as Penny kind of talked about, she said that the theme this year that the ladies picked, and you know that when the ladies pick a theme, I ought to stick with it, right? And so being the shrewd person that I am, I'm going to stay with the idea or the notion of just love. But I'm going to change it a little bit. I'm going to turn it on its head a little bit, and I'm going to talk about a just love. And so it's kind of the combining of the idea of justice and the idea of love, a just love. Just love, same thing. I mean, but other than the way that we ultimately work around what love really means, and we've talked about this in the past. When you can go back at some videos not too far back, maybe 6 or 8 weeks ago, when we were talking about the virtue of love and kind of how that interplays and what's the difference between the passion or the emotion of love and the virtue of love, because they're two different things. Yeah, maybe we'll talk about it today, maybe we won't, but I want to just talk about just love or a just love. I pick up this reading in the Gospel of John in chapter 15, and we're going to pick up from verse 8, where Jesus, before he goes into his high priestly prayer and ultimately goes to the cross, is having his last major discourse with his disciples before he departs. And it's kind of his 14, 15, and 16, great in the book of John, great narrative of Jesus, and just a substantial text as far as the thoughts of Jesus, how Jesus thinks, and just the deeper thoughts of some of the things that he presents to his disciples. But in verse 8, he says this: "My Father is glorified by this, but that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. Just as the Father has loved me, I have also loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be made full. This is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that one would lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you." That's an interesting text because, you know, when you read through the scripture, and especially when you read the Gospel of John or you read John's writings, you're always picking up this theme of love and how important love is. And again, we're talking about love as a virtue here. And so we're going to talk a little bit about love and a little bit about what it really means to love and for us to love. And as with our theme goes, just love or a just love. So when we talk about a just love, then what we're talking about is the idea of justice, right? Or the virtue of justice. Now remember that the virtue of justice is giving to someone their just due, that which is due them. We talked and have been talking a lot about the virtue of religion, which is of justice towards God, where we give God his just due. And so justice administered out of love becomes this beautiful picture of giving people this idea and this notion of their just due from the ethic of love, or from love, as we would call it. Not the passion, not that emotion that we have. Like when you can see you buy a brand new truck and you say, I love that truck. Or I see a new motorcycle, I say, I love that motorcycle. I wish I had that. Well, that's a different kind of love. Or even it's a different kind of love when I say that I love my wife. It's different than when I'm talking about loving others. And so there's this emotion of love, but then there's these actions of love, which we would call, that come out of our virtues, and especially the theological virtue of love that we're talking about today. So let's talk about it for a minute. So love basically and always will have the other person's best in mind. It always will. Love always has the other person's best in mind. So when we're talking about loving God, and we're talking about the idea of the virtue of religion, being justice towards God and loving God, then really what we're saying when we love God and the action by which we love God is when we have God's best interest in mind in all that we do. And so by that way, then we think about this text about love. And you talk about Jesus loving the Father and the Father loving Jesus and how we ought to abide in that love and how participate in that love and convey that love. The idea and the notion between the Father and the Son here is that Jesus loves the Father and he's giving the Father his just love, which he has his Father's good in mind, to where Jesus says, I don't do anything of my own initiative, but only the things that I see the Father doing, I do, and I only speak the things I hear the Father saying. In other words, what he was saying is that he came to promote the good of his Father, which is our Father as well. So in that instance, when Jesus was talking about thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love thy neighbor as thyself, when it comes down to love, a just love is to give God his due, recognizing that we want the good of God or whatever is good for God. Now, you could argue that God doesn't need anything from us, and that would be rightfully so. But I want you to think about it different. Okay, so the idea of what happens is that when we choose to love God and we put God's best interest in mind in all that we do, then what we do is in some cases, we end up in friendship with God, or it's a friendship with God. Well, why would you say that's true? Well, think about it. And we'll talk about when we talk about the other two areas of love. Okay, for friendship to be friendship, and there's called the virtue of friendship, but for friendship to be friendship, there's got to be two components. There has to be my love for you, and there has to be your love for me. So it's this relationship that goes back and forth. It's a mutually beneficial relationship where we enter into what we'd call a true friendship. A true friendship means I want what's best for you. And a true friendship is you want what's best for me. And that's what we would call our good friend. So when we love God and when we just love God, then what we're doing is we're approaching God and saying, I want your best interest in mind, God, and whatever's best for you is what I want to do. Then we enter into this relationship of loving God. But this friendship comes back to us from God because remember that it says that he first loved us. So the first step for us into friendship with God is to love God, to honor God, and to want God's best or have God's best interest in mind. Now that's the first part of love. The second part of love in that text that Jesus talks about loving your neighbor as yourself now. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, and mind. Second part, and love your neighbor as yourself. Let's talk about self-love first. And when I'm talking about self-love here, I'm not talking about a selfish love, about trying to take everything you can get for you, that you're always the center of attention, and that you think so highly about you that you're better than everybody else. You're in a different class than everybody else. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, when we're talking about the virtue of love, it's the idea of wanting the best for yourself as well. Now, a lot of times what happens is we don't want the best for ourselves, or we think we do, and sometimes we don't. So sometimes if you think about it, a person that might be suffering from, I don't know, from shame, let's use shame, that somebody that did something that was bad, they considered to be bad, and maybe it was bad. And so they're feeling ashamed, or they're ashamed of themselves. Well, what they can do in that shame is sometimes they can fail to love themselves because they might be too hard on themselves, calling themselves no good, calling themselves worthless, whatever the case might be. And so in that way, their love for themselves wouldn't be a just love, because the thoughts that they have about themselves are not the best thoughts. So when we talk about loving ourselves, meaning the virtue of love, what we're talking about is wanting the best for ourselves. Now that's sticky, isn't it? Because we can say, well, the best for me is I want a new Corvette, and I want a new house, and I want a new whatever the case might be. But I don't think it's talking about those kind of things that become a selfish love. It talks about understanding and realizing and working through our reason of what is best for us in our life. So let me give you an example of that. Let's say that when I was younger and I wanted to go to school. And so what I decided was that I wanted to be, let's say I wanted to be a lawyer. And so what happened though is that as I began to move towards being a lawyer, what I started to do was listening to other people that say that I'd never make it into law school, and that law school was too expensive, or that if you got to be a lawyer you would hate it. And then what happened was I began to look at myself and say, I don't think I can become a lawyer because I can't afford it, and I can't be a lawyer because I'm not smart enough to be a lawyer. And the other thing is that everybody tells me that when I become a lawyer, I'm not going to be happy as a lawyer. And so instead of doing that, I'm going to give up on law school, and I'm just going to work in a pizza shop for the rest of my life. In that case, you have to ask yourself the question were you really interested in bringing out and promoting in yourself your best self, that which is going to make you the best person that you can be? It's almost like the same thing with education, of gaining proper education. Yes, it's a challenge, but it brings out your best self when you do that. And so a just love towards yourself is a love that has your interest and best interest in mind. The same way friendship with God and a just love towards God has his best interest in mind. That's why this idea of love is such a broad concept, and why it's so big when we understand it in the Christian concept, right? Context. Now, the next one, it says, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, again, that's thinking about it in terms of when we talk about the virtue ethic of love, we're talking about the idea of having your neighbor's best interest in mind. Now, that might be easy to do with the neighbors that you love, but what about the neighbors that live around you that are the hard ones to deal with? They're coming home at 3 o'clock in the morning. They're blaring their music. They got their bass really up loud. You got to get up and go to work, and they're not going to get up and go to work, and they go in the house and turn up their music, and sometimes they're keeping you up all night long, and you might find it hard to love them because they put such an imposition on your life. Now, the closer you live with people, if you live in an apartment or a manufactured home community or a condominium, then that's even more amplified than, let's say, if you lived where you had a lot of acreage or where there was fewer houses per acre. But the idea, coming back to this notion of a just love, it has the idea of giving the other person their just due as it is towards being promoted towards their own good or the good of them. So it means that whenever we encounter our neighbor, or we encounter our friend, or God or ourselves, that what we're doing is we always have those person's best interest in mind all the time. And when we do that, what we find is we become people that understand how to abide in God's love, like Jesus is talking about. So when Jesus is talking about abiding in his love, we kind of think about with that, we go, well, what does it mean to abide in his love? And kind of what I'm saying here is that we abide in his love, in the love that Jesus has for the Father, when we have the Father's best interest in mind. We abide in his love when we have our best interest in mind, and we have abide in the love of God when we have other people's best interest in mind. The thing that makes it important is that we never make people a means in themselves, a means to our end. In other words, we never use people for advantage and for our sake. We never use God in that same way. And we don't use ourselves in that way or abuse ourselves as just a means to some other end. Now, I realize that I'm just touching on the very tip of this deep, deep iceberg. But what I want you to do today when we're talking about just love is I want you to think about how important love really is in our lives. That we begin to love people when we want the best for them. And that's why for a Christian, it's wrong for us to have an enemy. Because whenever we have an enemy, Scripture commands us that we're to love them or we're to have their best in mind, their good in mind, which then therefore they cannot be our enemy, although we may still remain their enemy. As you can see, there's a lot to think about when we talk about love. But I guess the question that I want to leave you with today in this short video on this National Baptist Church Sunday is, are you ready, willing, and able to begin to participate in love? To begin to maybe change your relationship towards God, to one that, well, what can I get from God? What can he do for me? To the attitude of, what can I give to God? How can I treat God justly like I ought to? With my worship, with my tithe, with my attendance at church, with the way that I respond and want to promote his values and his morality, even above my own or that of the world. The same thing which you are doing, would you be ready and willing, if I asked a question, to self-reflect on self-love and see if you're loving selfishly or if you have a true, proper understanding of self-love that really looks at and says, what is the best for me? What is it that I have in mind of my own good end or where I'm going in life? And the last thing is how we love and whether or not we're willing to love our neighbors, even those that are sometimes not easy to love. And lastly, love our enemies. When we do that and we begin to walk in that fashion, in that way, before God, ourselves, and others, we begin to abide in just love. Well, I hope this makes sense to you today. I know it's brief. I know that there's a lot to think about, and I know I'm just scratching the surface. But on this special day, and with the ladies telling me that I ought to be talking about love, I thought that this might be a good way to get us thinking again about what it means for a Christian to truly love. God bless you, and have a great day.